Thank you for joining us again, Dale. I know it's been some time since you last shared your story with us.
Yeah, it's been a while. Been keeping to myself mostly. Didn't think folks would be interested in hearing more.
Your story struck a chord with a lot of people. There's more to your life than just that one encounter, isn't there?
Guess there is. Been around for 70 years now. Seen a lot. Lost a lot. Buster. He was my old dog. Passed away about 13 years ago. Ain't never been the same without him.
Tell us about Buster.
Buster. He was a good dog. Came into my life when I needed him most. Back in the 90s when I moved to Coffeeville. Wasn't much for company back then, just me and him. He was a loyal friend, always by my side when I'd go hunting or working on engines. Couldn't afford much, but I had him, and that was enough.
You mentioned you moved to Coffeeville in the 90s. What brought you there?
Wanted to get away from Youngsville, Ohio, where I grew up. Too many memories, too much pain. My wife, she passed not long before I left. No kids, no family left, just me. Figured I'd start fresh, someplace quiet. Coffeeville seemed like a good spot, out of the way, peaceful. I'm a mechanic by trade, so I set up shop working on cars, small engines, whatever folks brought in.
I'm sorry to hear about your wife. Would you mind telling us about her?
Her name was Mary. We met right after I got out of the Army. She was something else, strong and kind. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Lived in Youngsville, a small house near the factories. I was working as a mechanic there, just like my old man taught me. Mary was a nurse, spent her days taking care of folks who needed it most. She had a heart of gold. We were married for 25 years. Never had any kids, though we tried. But it didn't matter. We were happy. Spent our time together camping, fishing, just enjoying the simple things. Mary was my rock. When she got sick, it was the hardest thing I ever went through. Cancer took her in 93. After she was gone, I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't stay in Youngsville. Too many memories, too much pain.
That's when you decided to move to Coffeeville?
Yeah. I needed a fresh start, a place where no one knew me, where I could just be alone with my thoughts. Coffeeville was that place. It was quiet, small, and I could lose myself in work. Fixing cars, working on engines. That was my way of keeping my mind off things. And then there was the woods. Always felt drawn to them, like they were a refuge from the world.
It sounds like the outdoors played a big role in your life, both before and after Mary passed.
Yeah, it did. The outdoors was where I felt closest to her, I guess. We spent so much time out there, just the two of us. And later, it was just me and Buster. The woods, the rivers, they gave me peace. At least until that night in 2004.
Tell us about the place you moved to in Coffeeville.
It was a small, rustic place just outside of town. Nothing fancy, just a little cabin I fixed up myself. 2 rooms, a wood stove, and a porch with a swing. I liked that swing. After a long day, I'd sit out there with a cold beer, just listening to the sounds of the woods, getting lost in my thoughts. There was something about those quiet evenings, sitting there with Buster at my feet, watching the sun set behind the trees. I'd think about Mary, about the life we had, and all the things that didn't turn out the way we planned. But somehow that little house and that swing made it all a bit easier to bear. It was my sanctuary.
It sounds like that place gave you some peace, even after everything you'd been through.
Yeah, it did. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't need much, just a place to call my own and a spot to sit and think. That swing saw me through some dark times, and when things got too heavy, I'd take Buster and head out into the woods just to clear my head.
Must have been hard to leave that place behind.
It was. But after those encounters and the way folks started treating me, I knew I couldn't stay. It was like the peace I found there was gone, replaced by something darker. Leaving was hard, but staying would have been harder.
Where did you go after you left Coffeeville?
I packed up what little I had and moved to Birmingham, Alabama. Figured a big city would be a good place to disappear. Found a little apartment, started working in a garage there. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. I kept to myself mostly, didn't make any friends, didn't talk to anyone about what happened in those woods. Didn't see the point.
And Buster, did he make the move with you?
He did for a while, but he was old, and the city didn't suit him. He wasn't the same dog in Birmingham. He got sick, and I had to put him down. That was about 13 years ago now. After that, well, things went downhill. I turned to the bottle. Started drinking pretty heavy. It was the only way I could numb the pain, forget about what I'd lost, what I'd seen. I'd sit in that tiny apartment, drinking myself into oblivion, trying to forget. But no matter how much I drank, those memories kept coming back. The encounters, Buster, Mary, all of it.
That sounds like a dark time in your life.
It was. Spent a lot of years drowning in alcohol, trying to bury everything. Never told a soul about those encounters after I moved away from Coffeeville. Figured no one would believe me anyway. So I kept it all inside, let it eat away at me. It's only now, after all these years, that I'm finally talking about it. Guess I'm too old to care what people think anymore.
Why did you decide to share your story now after all this time?
Maybe it's just time. I've held on to this for too long. People can believe what they want. I know what I saw, and that's enough for me. Besides, Dale ain't even my real name. Just a name I used to keep myself safe, to keep folks from tracking me down.
Why did you choose to come forward in the first place?
Maybe it's because people need to know. The world ain't always what it seems. Sometimes there are things out there that can't be explained, and sometimes the truth is scarier than any story.
Dale, can you tell us about your encounters with the Bigfoot? Was the first encounter the one we heard about in the video?
Yes, that was the first encounter. What was described in your video was pretty accurate. It was a late autumn evening in Coffeeville, just around dusk, when Buster and I decided to head out for a bit of hunting. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet, as we made our way along an old, familiar trail. Buster, my faithful old dog, trotted ahead of me, his nose close to the ground, picking up every scent as usual. The air was crisp, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves under our feet. We'd been walking for a while when I started to feel uneasy. It was that prickly feeling on the back of your neck, the kind you get when you know something isn't right. Buster must have sensed it too, because he suddenly stopped in his tracks, his ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. I'd never seen him act like that before. He was always calm, steady, but now he seemed nervous. I scanned the trees around us, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. The shadows were long and deep, and it was getting harder to see. But then I heard it, a heavy, deliberate crunching of leaves behind us. I spun around, gripping my rifle tight, but I didn't see anything at first. just the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. But Buster was locked in on something. His growl grew louder, and his body tensed. Then, through the dim light, I caught a glimpse of it, a massive, hulking figure, partially hidden among the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The creature was enormous, towering at least 8 or 9 feet tall, with long, matted hair covering its entire body. The smell hit me next, a rancid, earthy stench like a mix of wet dog and decaying leaves. It made my stomach turn. Buster barked then, a sharp, frantic sound, and the thing moved. It started to circle us, keeping just out of clear sight, but close enough that I could hear the heavy thud of its footsteps. My mind raced. What the hell was this thing, and why was it stalking us? I tugged on Buster's leash, trying to lead us away. But every time we moved, the creature moved with us, staying just behind, always in the shadows. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back despite the cool evening air. We were being hunted, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, the creature stepped out from the trees just a few yards ahead of us. It was even bigger up close, its eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. It let out a horrible, guttural yell, a sound that shook me to my core. Buster whimpered and backed up against my legs, trembling. I didn't think, I just acted. I raised my rifle and fired off a shot. The crack of the gun echoed through the woods, and for a moment everything went silent. The creature recoiled, but I couldn't tell if I'd hit it or not. There was no blood, no sign of injury. It just stood there, staring at us with those cold, dark eyes. Panic took over, and I turned and ran, dragging Buster with me. I've never run so fast in my life. The branches slapped against my face, and I could hear the creature crashing through the woods behind us. But somehow we made it back to the truck. I shoved Buster inside and slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition. As we sped down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there it was, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us with an almost human-like intelligence. I didn't stop until we were miles away, the creature's eyes still burning in my memory. The next morning, after a restless night, I decided to go back. I had to know if what I saw was real, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. When I reached the spot, the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. I searched the area, and there, in the soft earth by the trees, I found them, massive footprints, much too large to be any humans. The prints were deep, each step showing the full outline of a foot. Whatever it was real, and it was big. I didn't stick around to find more. Those footprints were all the proof I needed. Something was out there in those woods, something that wasn't meant to be seen. Some things are better left alone.
You mentioned there were a few other encounters after that. Can you tell us about that?
About 6 months after that first encounter, Buster and I went camping in those same woods. I don't know what made me go back. Maybe it was a stubborn streak. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. Whatever the reason, we found ourselves deep in the Coffeeville woods, far from town, setting up camp like we'd done countless times before. The day passed uneventfully. We set up the tent, gathered firewood, and cooked up some beans over the campfire. The woods felt peaceful, almost as if they were trying to lull me into a false sense of security. Buster seemed at ease too, lying by the fire with his head resting on his paws, his tail occasionally thumping against the ground. But as night fell, that uneasy feeling started to creep back in. The woods around us grew darker, the shadows longer, and the familiar sounds of the forest seemed to fade into an oppressive silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, though I hadn't seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. It was just a gut feeling, the same one I'd had 6 months ago. We crawled into the tent around midnight. Buster curled up at my feet and I laid back, staring up at the roof of the tent, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept drifting back to that night, the creature's horrible yell, and those eyes, cold and watchful. It must have been a couple of hours later when I woke up with a start. At first I didn't know what had woken me. The fire had long since died down, and the tent was pitch black. I could hear Buster growling low in his throat, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. He was on edge, his body tense, ears perked up. Something was out there. I strained my ears, listening for anything out of place. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps moving slowly around the tent. My heart started pounding, and I reached for the rifle I'd kept by my side, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. I could see the faint outline of something massive standing there, blocking out the little light that filtered through the fabric. My breath caught in my throat as the smell hit me, a putrid, rancid stench, just like before. It was back. Buster was growling louder now, a deep, guttural sound that I'd never heard from him before. He was scared, and so was I. The creature just stood there, so close I could hear its heavy breathing. I was too terrified to move, too terrified to even think about what I should do next. Then slowly, the creature moved closer, brushing up against the side of the tent. The fabric bulged inward as it pressed against it, and I could hear the low, guttural rumble coming from its chest, almost like a growl. I held my breath, my finger hovering over the trigger, but I didn't dare fire. I was afraid of what might happen if I did. The creature let out a low, menacing grunt, and Buster barked sharply, his hackles raised. For a moment I thought the thing was going to tear through the tent and drag us out into the woods, but instead it slowly backed away, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. I stayed frozen in place, listening as it circled the tent a few more times before finally retreating into the woods. Even after the footsteps faded away, I didn't move. I just sat there, clutching the rifle, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. Eventually, Buster relaxed a little, but he stayed alert, his eyes fixed on the tent flap. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We stayed there, in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise. Every little sound made me jump. Every shadow made my heart race. When morning finally came, I stepped out of the tent, my legs shaky and weak. The campsite was just as we'd left it, but I knew what I'd heard, what I'd smelled. There were no tracks this time, no signs that anything had been there, but I knew. Buster knew too. He kept close to me, his eyes scanning the tree line, his nose twitching in the air. I packed up camp as fast as I could, and we hightailed it out of there. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us again, hidden in the trees, just waiting for the next time we were foolish enough to come back. I never did go camping in those woods again. Whatever was out there wasn't something I wanted to tangle with a second time. Some things are better left undisturbed, and those woods, well, they belong to whatever that thing was.
Were there any other encounters?
There was one other encounter, but I'd rather not talk about it. At least not at this time. Maybe save it for another interview.
I understand. Dale, thank you for joining us for this interview. It was very insightful. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to click like and subscribe for more episodes of Whispers in the Woods. Stay tuned for more mysterious tales and intriguing interviews.